Christmas Eve. The dining room glowed with soft amber light from the chandelier, spilling over the polished mahogany table like liquid gold. Crystal glasses caught the flicker from the candles, scattering little prisms onto the cream tablecloth. My fingers smoothed the velvet of my deep green dress, a nervous habit I thought I'd outgrown years ago. To anyone looking in, I was the picture of calm, hair perfectly curled, lipstick in that exact shade of red you see in old Hollywood films, posture straight, smile polite. I had built this version of myself brick by brick, hiding the scars beneath layers of silk and self-control. Across from me, my father, Richard Miller, was halfway through carving the roasted turkey. His sleeves were rolled up, and his voice carried the kind of confidence that always silenced the room. My mother, Ellen, fussed with the cranberry sauce, while my younger brother, Josh, texted under the table, thinking no one noticed. And then it happened. Dad set the carving knife down with a deliberate clink. He cleared his throat, looking straight at me. "We've made a decision," he said, as if announcing the weather. "We're cutting you out." The words landed like shards of glass in my chest. For a moment, the only sound was the soft hum of Bing Crosby from the record player in the corner. My fingers curled around the stem of my wine glass, the coolness grounding me, stopping the tremor threatening to betray me. Then came the sharp inhale from the other end of the table. My grandmother, Margaret, 82, sharp as a whip, and never one to hide her feelings, pressed her napkin to her lips. She gasped. And the whole room seemed to lean into that sound, as if waiting for me to crack. I didn't. Instead, I took a slow sip of my wine, letting the dryness spread across my tongue. Some truths, I reminded myself, were worth saving for the right moment. 3 years earlier. It was the winter after I'd turned 25, and New York felt colder than I'd ever known. Not the kind of cold you fight with a thicker coat, the kind that seeps into your bones when you realize you don't belong somewhere anymore. I was still living in my parents' Upper West Side apartment back then, working part-time at a boutique and pretending to figure out my future. At least, that's how my father phrased it, with air quotes. The tension had been building for months. My father had a vision for my life. Marry someone from the right circles, join the family business in a role that was more ornamental than functional, and never, under any circumstances, make decisions that could damage the Miller name. That night, it all broke. We were in the den, the fire crackling between us like it was trying to referee the argument. My father stood by the mantel, his arms crossed, jaw tight. My mother sat in the corner, eyes fixed on the rug as though she could disappear into its Persian swirls. "You're wasting your potential, Emily," he said. "No, Dad," I countered, my voice shaking. "I'm just not wasting it the way you want me to." He didn't like that answer. "You walk out of here, don't expect another cent from us. Not for rent, not for groceries, not for anything." I remember my palms sweating, my throat tightening, the lump so big it was hard to breathe. My hands trembled, but I clenched them into fists at my sides, digging my nails into my skin until I felt the sting. That's when Grandma Margaret spoke up from the doorway. She was wearing her favorite cashmere shawl, her silver hair pinned back. In her hand, she held something small, a locket I'd admired since childhood. She walked over, pressed it into my palm, and whispered, "Don't let fear decide for you." Her voice was calm, but her eyes, they held a spark that felt like a lifeline. I didn't pack much that night, just 2 suitcases and the locket, tucked safe in my coat pocket. I didn't have a real plan, only the certainty that staying would mean shrinking into someone I didn't recognize. As I stepped into the biting winter air, the city lights blurred through my tears. My father's silhouette stayed framed in the window, arms still crossed, unmoving. And that was the last night I lived under their roof. The first weeks on my own felt like stepping into a storm without an umbrella. I rented a tiny studio in Queens with peeling wallpaper and a radiator that clanged all night like it was haunted. My bed was a secondhand futon. My dresser was 2 stacked milk crates. I learned quickly that canned soup could be stretched into 3 meals if you added enough water. But there was a strange freedom in it, the kind that came from knowing every choice was mine. No one was peering over my shoulder, no one was weighing my worth in dollars spent or social status gained. I found work as an assistant in a small but ambitious interior design firm owned by a woman named Charlotte Bennett. Charlotte was in her late 50s, all sharp cheekbones and sharper wit, with a habit of pairing designer heels with jeans and a paint-stained t-shirt. On my first day, she looked at my resume, which was embarrassingly thin, then at me. "You've got good taste," she said. "Now, let's see if you can survive the grind." Survive was the right word. I ran coffee, sourced fabric samples, and learned how to navigate Manhattan with a stack of blueprints under one arm and an umbrella that always seemed to flip inside out. I stayed late, studying color theory and drafting software long after everyone else had gone home. There were nights I doubted everything. Nights I stared at my reflection in the subway window and wondered if my father had been right, if I was destined to fail without the safety net. But then small wins began to stack up. A client loved the mood board I'd created. Charlotte started trusting me with bigger tasks. I negotiated a discount from a vendor, saving the firm thousands. It wasn't glamorous, but it was proof that I could build something from the ground up. 2 years in, I landed my first independent project, redesigning a loft in Brooklyn for a young tech entrepreneur. It paid more than my annual salary had when I started. Word spread, slowly at first, then faster. My portfolio grew, my client list expanded, and by the end of the 3rd year, I had enough to launch my own firm. Bennett Interiors and Design quietly became Miller & Company, though I kept my surname discreetly off any public family connections. I wanted my work to stand on its own. On social media, I stayed vague. I posted sunsets from rooftops, cappuccinos at corner cafes, maybe a photo of a fabric swatch. No one in my family knew the scale of what I'd built, the contracts worth hundreds of thousands, the art pieces sourced from Paris, the staff of 5 who looked to me for direction. The secrecy wasn't about revenge. It was about peace. But peace has a way of being disrupted. It started with an invitation, hand-delivered by a courier in a deep green envelope, the Miller family crest embossed in gold. Christmas Eve dinner. No note, no apology. Just the date, the time, the address I'd once called home. I stared at it for a long time, the paper heavy between my fingers. Then I smiled, not the polite, practiced kind I'd worn for years, but a real one. Because this time, I wouldn't be walking into that house the same woman who had left. The Miller townhouse looked exactly the same as the night I left, 4 stories of sandstone and glass, with wreaths on every window and garland draped like a crown over the front door. But as I stepped out of the black car I'd hired, the cold air bit my cheeks in a way that felt different. I wasn't arriving home. I was arriving as a guest. Inside, the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon pine filled the air. Warmth radiated from the fireplace in the grand hall, and every surface glittered with Christmas decor, the way my mother always insisted it should. Guests milled about, champagne glasses in hand. My arrival barely registered at first. I wore a deep burgundy silk jumpsuit, gold earrings that caught the light, and a coat draped over my shoulders like armor. My assistant, Claire, had insisted on the coat. "It's very CEO entering her domain," she'd said, and she was right. My father was at the far end of the room, talking to 2 business associates. My mother arranged a cheese platter with the precision of a jeweler setting diamonds. Josh stood near the piano, scrolling his phone. And then there was Grandma Margaret, in a silver shawl, sitting in her favorite armchair. She saw me first. The way her face lit up was the first real warmth I felt that evening. Dinner was served an hour later. The table was as grand as ever, fine china, gold-rimmed glasses, a centerpiece of white roses and pine cones dusted with artificial snow. I took my seat across from my father, the same position I'd always had, though this time my posture wasn't the posture of someone bracing for impact. The conversation was polite, almost brittle, until my father leaned back, set his utensils down, and repeated the same words he'd once said in that den years ago. "We've decided," he began, glancing at my mother. "You're no longer included in certain family matters, financially or otherwise." A murmur ran down the table, but no one moved. That's when I decided the moment had arrived. I set down my fork and dabbed my lips with my napkin, the gold bracelet on my wrist catching the candlelight. Dad, I said evenly, I don't think you understand. You cut me out a long time ago. His eyes narrowed. And yet here you are. Yes, I replied, but not for what you think. I reached into my bag and pulled out a sleek leather folder, the kind you'd see in high-stakes boardrooms. I slid it across the table toward him. Inside were photographs, not of family vacations or old memories, but of my projects. The Brooklyn loft, the Manhattan penthouse, the Hamptons beach house, each stamped with the Miller and Company logo. My father flipped through them, his brow furrowing. You did these? I own the firm that did these, I said. 10 employees. 7 figures in annual revenue. Fully independent. No Miller family money. The silence that followed was almost tangible. My mother's hand froze halfway to her wine glass. Josh looked up from his phone, actually paying attention for once. And Grandma Margaret? She sat straighter, her eyes shining with a pride so fierce it made my throat tighten. I let the weight of it settle before continuing. You taught me what it feels like to be cut off. I taught myself how to never need to be cut in. My father's jaw worked, but no words came. Across the table, Grandma set her fork down gently and smiled at me. Well, she said, breaking the silence, I always knew you'd surprise us. But this is magnificent. And for the first time in years, every pair of eyes at that table was on me. Not as the family's black sheep, but as something far more dangerous. Someone who no longer needed their approval. The silence after my reveal wasn't awkward. It was commanding. It was the kind of silence that comes when people realize the narrative they've believed for years has just been rewritten in front of them. I took a sip of my wine, giving them time to process. I'm not here to beg for my place back, I said, my voice even, steady. I'm here to make something clear. The way things were, the control, the judgment, the conditions, that's over. My father's lips thinned. You think success changes everything? I met his gaze without flinching. No. I think growth changes everything. And here's how this will work if we're going to be in each other's lives at all. I looked directly at him first. Number 1, respect. Not the polite, pretend kind, but the real thing. That means you speak to me as an equal, not as someone who needs your permission to exist. His brows drew together, but he didn't speak. I turned to my mother. Number 2, honesty. If you have a problem with me, say it to my face, not behind my back to family friends. Her eyes darted down to her plate. Then I glanced at Josh. Number 3, effort. You're my brother, but you treat me like a stranger. If you want me in your life, act like it. Otherwise, we can keep things exactly as distant as they've been. Josh swallowed hard and muttered, okay. Finally, I looked at the whole table. And number 4, we don't repeat the past. No more ultimatums. No more using money as a leash. I'm financially independent, and that means I choose when and how I engage with this family. I let the words settle. No shouting. No drama. Just facts. Grandma Margaret's gaze held mine, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. She was the only one who looked like she understood every beat of this moment, because in a way, she had been the seed planter the night she gave me that locket. My father leaned back, exhaling slowly. And if we don't agree to these conditions? I set my wine glass down gently. Then we see each other at funerals. And I wish you well in between. The weight of the statement hung over the table. It wasn't a threat. It was a choice theirs to make. For the first time, my father didn't rush to reassert control. He simply nodded once, almost imperceptibly, as if acknowledging he'd underestimated me. Grandma broke the tension by lifting her glass. To Emily, she said, for building her own ladder and climbing higher than anyone expected. A reluctant chorus of "to Emily" followed, but I didn't care about the enthusiasm level. The shift had happened. The power balance was no longer tilted. And this time it would stay that way. In the weeks after Christmas Eve, something unexpected happened. The phone calls started, not often and not always smooth, but they came. My mother called first, her voice tentative, asking how my week had been. Josh texted me links to music he thought I'd like, as if testing whether we could build something from the smallest exchanges. And my father, well, he didn't call. But when I ran into him at a charity gala in February, he shook my hand. Not a perfunctory, limp handshake, a real one, firm and deliberate. For him, that was an apology in disguise. I didn't rush to believe in permanent change, but I noticed the small shifts. They didn't try to pry into my finances anymore. They asked questions about my work without the usual undertone of skepticism. And when Easter came, the invitation to dinner had no conditions attached. One afternoon in spring, I visited Grandma Margaret at her townhouse. She was sitting by the window, sunlight streaming over her silver hair. We drank tea, and she asked me about my latest project, a penthouse in Tribeca for a couple who'd made their fortune in tech. When I told her about negotiating the art budget, she laughed. You were always good at holding your ground. You just didn't know it yet. As I stood to leave, she reached into the drawer of her side table and pulled out the locket she'd given me the night I left home. I still carried it, but she wanted to see it. I opened it for her. Inside, on one side, was a tiny photo of her and me from when I was 10. On the other side was a scrap of paper, folded so small it looked like it belonged in a dollhouse. I'd never noticed it before. Unfolding it, I found her handwriting. When you remember who you are, nothing can cut you out. The words hit me in a way they couldn't have years ago. Back then, they would have felt like a riddle. Now, they were the truth I'd lived into. I hugged her before leaving, the locket warm in my hand. That night, as I walked through my apartment, my own space, filled with pieces I'd chosen, built, and earned, I realized something. My story wasn't about being cut out. It was about walking out and learning to thrive beyond the boundaries others set for me. And as I poured myself a glass of wine and looked out over the city skyline, I whispered to no one in particular, "Merry Christmas to me."